topic that is potentially controversial. We'll see where the discussion goes. This is not a proposal. This is not a suggestion in any way. It's raising your awareness on some maybe inconsistencies or inconformances in the protocol, which you might have seen before, but might have wondered why they are there and so on. And I will just transparently like to raise the discussion on these different issues that we've also seen somewhere. So as an introduction to the subject, it's sometimes hard to answer questions like, well, if we have a new event type, the new artifact deployed event, what should the name be? Might sound silly, but the name is actually quite important because it helps a lot. And as we've discussed already several times, the language we use is quite important. It should be as natural as possible so people can understand without having read a specification what it is about. And if we introduce a new area of event coverage, what event types should be there? That discussion was quite heavily held when discussing the deployment event. Should we have a service deployed event or an artifact deployed event, or how do we do with cloud native deployment with canaries and such? What event types should be decent to have in this new area, which we haven't so far uncovered? And how should the relations be to other event types? So we already now saw a question mark on an event type link for this retriggering. Well, is that a good way? Well, first, is that a good way to relate the types? And what should the link then be called? And also, what properties should a new event type have? It's not always easy to answer these questions, we have realized. And we have some lacking there when it comes to guidelines on naming and structures. So this is the current list of all events, including the artifact deployed event now. Just for reference. And if I would do as I was into when I talked about CD events, if I do the same here for Eiffel now, marking what is the actual subject that we are talking about in this event, and what is the predicate, what is the activity that happens on this subject. It will look like this. I don't think that's very controversial. That's how we would interpret it. So far it looks quite good, I would say. I mean, we have a subject and we have some predicates working on that. So we have succeeded in that case to make it conformant and quite well structured, naming types in a good way. Now, if we make the font smaller and add the members of the events, you might not be able to read much of this, and you might not be able to see the colors either. But things start to be a bit interesting now when we look at how these colors appear in the different events. And I think I need to read some of it so you can, since you can't read it yourselves. So the first 4 events to the left here, we have 4 different activity events: triggered, cancelled, started, and finished. I'm not saying that this is the only way to structure this, but according to my best knowledge, when I did this, at least, I assigned the different properties to what part of the event are we dealing with on this property. So are we talking about the subject, or are we talking about the predicates for these parameters? What do they explain, or what part of the event do they belong to? So in the activity trigger event, as you might know, the activity trigger event is not just there to say that this is what an activity looks like. It's also saying it was now triggered. So the activity trigger event has 2 meanings, both the definition of an activity and the definition of, or a explanation of the activity or the predicate used on that subject. So the name and the categories property, I would argue, belong to the activity definition. Those are things in the definition of the activity. And then we have the triggers property and the execution type, which is more related to the actual predicate here, the actual triggering going on. And then the other three events in the same subject area, none of them have any subject related properties. They only have predicate related properties, which I think is a good thing, because that is by intention how we think it should be done, since we have the links there. So the links in all of these other three events, we have the activity execution link pointing to the activity trigger event. And one reason for that link then is, of course, if you follow that link, you will find the definition of the activity, which is then the name and the category, for example. And there is no intention to have any subject-related properties repeated in the other events. So I think this is still not a problem. It's maybe a good thing to explain why we don't need to duplicate data. We don't want to duplicate data. We might have some other parts here which are not as obvious, and we can see some maybe inconsistencies in some parts as well. One example is, for example, the artifact reused down here. So the artifact area, the artifact subject, has 4 different events, 1 created event, and then we have a deployed, published, and a reused event. It's only, again, the created event that has the subject content on it. And then it has also, as I see it, at least 1 predicate related property. That is the build command, which was used when actually creating this artifact. This could be discussed if that classification is correct fully or not. But you see, for example, in the artifact reused event down there to the left, there are no data members at all. So that means that the only information we have there are things in the links. You can see that on the next slide, but there are no data properties related to the predicate nor to the subject in that case. It's something we should at least be aware of, that we have such event. There is another one, issue verified, has neither any data fields. So in some sense, these two make up a type of events which has no data on them really, except for the semantics in the links that are also part of these events, which could be in some sense considered data. You'll see that in a moment as well. So that was some examples here. Then you can think this. We can think about why do we have these subject events that contains subject-related properties, and they have different names. I mean, shouldn't they all be like definition events or created events? Why do we have different predicates telling or talking about the definition of some subject? Well, the obvious answer is because we have joined that with some predicates. And we can just reflect on, is that a good thing or not? Should we have done it in one other way? That's why I started saying that this might be a bit controversial. So I'm not sure where this discussion will go, but just wanted to raise it to your awareness. I think I stopped there with that part. And I just show the links. Now it's even smaller for you, I'm afraid, just to be able to fill it all in one page, and you cannot read most of this. And also when I did this, I realized I will never do this manually again. I should have done it through a script from the beginning. In this case, I haven't, at least not yet, marked the link types with any subject or predicate related relations. Well, mostly because I didn't really have time to do it, but it could also be argued, well, what is the use for that, or is it really meaningful? We can maybe come there sometime as well. So first, before I go into some more discussions on different inconsistencies that we might see here, we can maybe ask the question first. Have you also seen some other things that I haven't mentioned yet that are a bit inconsistent in the protocol? Before I make up some more examples, and what are your reflections or your thoughts when you see this, how the protocol is structured?
I thought about it when you were showing us on the retrigger thing, for the new setup.
Yeah.
The retrigger thing, I directly thought about the reduced.
Yeah.
Because the new thing. Because there we have an event for some re thing.
Yeah.
And then the trigger type is just a
Good point. Yeah.
That's was probably the first time that I thought about it. Really, why do we do this in different ways?
Exactly. Yeah. So this is a very good reason to bring up discussions like this, and we should have a clear description on how do we handle re things. We already handle reuse in this way. Now we have a new proposal to handle re-triggering up activities in another way. Should it have been an activity re-triggered instead? Any other thoughts?
I think it's a long way to fall. But there's one more thing that we should add to the consistency, and that is how we say invent links. There are plenty of examples where there's sort of doubtable use of links instead of defining a data feed. I think we can have a few examples here where you can see a almost clear abuse of the link principles instead of defining a feed for it. And I think that should be in some way also controlled to make sure that we're not sort of creating links where you instead should have a data feed.
You mean this one? The issue verified.
Yeah.
Has a, for example,
there are a few others.
Yeah.
I think that should definitely be mentioned and possible rectified or controlled. Because I think as links, obviously, it's a little bit of a it's a hassle in a certain way. It adds a lot of value, but the more links we have, the more complication it gets to have a sort of a graph of related. So and since it's not well represented in CD foundation, so over circ in the link is something we should not do. So we should try to keep a very stiff and very concise link set and try to use that with maximum values. So sort of just branching out and doing links for everything, because that will probably not be served ourselves in the big one.
Yeah. So we could exemplify that discussion with this inconsistency that we have between the conference level modified event and the issue verified event. In the issue verified event, I think maybe they were more or less created at the same time, about 2017, maybe both of these events, or maybe even 2016. But the issue verified event, if I don't remember wrong now, it was updated sometime later when the issue defined event was added. So before we had an issue defined event, I'm pretty sure this I can't, sorry, I should do this way. These link types here, which are now called failed issue, inconclusive issue, and successful issue, those I believe were properties of the former issue verified event. But now when we added an issue defined event, or now, it was several years ago, we needed a way to reference this new issue defined event. So we turned those different properties into link types to instead reference the issue defined event, which makes it a bit strange. We here say we provide a result information in the semantics of the link types, these all relate to the same issue or same, well, they could be probably only one of them in one event, but they all relate to an issue, and the link type itself says if it's failed, successful, inconclusive. Whereas in the conference level modified event, we have a data field for name and value, and the value there says whether this is successful or failed. So there we have a data field semantically saying similar things as we here have in a link type, which is not very nice conformant wise in the protocol, I would say. Furthermore, we are now discussing to include a conference level basis. That's the temporary name of that link type onto the conference level modified event, because we want to say what test case execution or what test case was the basis of this conference level being set. We don't have any way to declare that today through the conference level modified event. So we are thinking about setting it as a conference level basis, pointing to the test case triggered event, I'm pretty sure we said, because we normally want to refer to the definition of the subject, so to say. So the base of this conference level being set, either successful or failed, is that test case execution, and whether that succeeded or failed has probably had an impact on this conference level being successful or failed. Now, the verification basis here points to the test case finished event and not the test case triggered event. So if it should be conformant with the current issue verified event, we should instead have the conference level modified event linking to the test case finished event, which is, I would argue, a bit wrong semantically, since we want to say what test case execution was it that we are basing this on, not the result. But that discussion is not finished, so we might end up having a link to the test case finished event anyway. But just wanted to highlight that, yeah, we have already used it in one way here, but it might not be the way we want it to be for the future. And I think I have another page here for the same thing. So again, explaining then, the issue verified event has no data members, but the conference level modified has. So the value here in the conference level modified event is the same type of field as we have in the link type for the issue verified event. So then I just threw out a proposal or some kind of idea here. What if we changed our conference level modified event to become two different events? One conference level defined event, similar to the issue defined event, and one conference level verified event. Or maybe, to please Eric, we should call it conference label verified and conference label defined rather as well. So of course that would be a change that wouldn't be appreciated by too many current users of Eiffel, but it would make the protocol more consistent and more conformant. And I stopped there again. Any thoughts on this? Sorry, what's the
compared to the defined? What's the difference between the defined and verified?
Defined is just this is a conference level with a name, and then the verified event says that, well, now we have verified that this conference level, whatever you want to call it, has now been successfully or failed verification. Just as the issue verified tells if the verification itself was successful or failed.
I mean that a confidence is not defined when it's defined when it's verified.
The conference label is defined. The subject is the conference label, not the conference of something. It's just a conference label. It's a name, like a flow context defined, or an activity defined, which is not yet triggered, if you would have that. The definition of something which is not yet set, it's not stamped anywhere. So that is then an event that would come very, very occasionally, very, very seldom probably, and would live more or less forever, just like the flow context event today.
Yeah, then you should probably change the name altogether, because level is something that is not the label itself, but how it's being applied. So mindset.
Yeah, it should be label. Yeah, label. Label is better.
So then you have to sort of distinguish the data, the label, from its application, which is the level.
I would do that directly because that's.
So would it then be unique, or would you still define?
Why do you need to define the label itself in the first place? Is it
To make it conformant within the protocol.
Entities, the way that we then later have to apply it. Do we do that?
Why did we do it for the issue defined event? Why didn't we just have the issue verified event point to the Jira URI directly? Why do we need an event for it?
Well, I presume it's because you need. Well, first of all, I presume that it's a matter of state transition, not applying a label at all. But
the defined event is
not.
It's
been defined actually.
The defined event is not a state transition. It hasn't any. Yeah. So the issue defined event has no predicate properties at all. It's just subject properties. So I would argue it's a pure definition event that could be replaced by a link in the events that use it instead. Into external system.
Such case.
As long as you have an external system that you can point to with URI. If it's just some paper somewhere, I don't know, then you might need to express it here. Was there another comment on that? No?
I'm just thinking how it will work then for the sub-confidence bit, because you might have, like, you have a confidence level and then you want 5 test cases to them, and each test case relates to a sub-confidence level. I think there was a presentation yesterday on the hierarchy.
Yeah.
So
I guess
just,
each sub-confidence or the sub-confidence labels would then be referenced from the confidence labels, I would guess as well, I assume. I'm not sure if those could change over time. I mean, this is not a thought through idea at all, but good that you raised it anyway.
But I guess you could. Sorry. But I guess you could question the modified term. So the confidence label, if you say that it's actually modified, it should be something else. Maybe you don't want to split them. Maybe they're modified as should be changed.
It's a bit strange to call it modified. Yes, that's the only event I believe that is called something modified.
Yeah.
Why isn't the source change modified when we upload a new patch set to it?
Yeah, I was gonna. So I think having a confidence label defined goes sort of hand in hand with what I talked a bit about yesterday. This is about having a recipe and a results. So the defined would be like there is a confidence label with this name. I think you had a good analogy before, the stamp. So I declare that there is a stamp that when I use it, it will say sanity verified. And then when I send the verified event, I decide whether I should use red ink to indicate a failure or green ink to indicate a success. Yeah. So those are 2 different things. But the question then becomes, what do you connect the confidence label defined event to? Because you don't connect it to a specific composition, because it doesn't belong on that level, it belongs on the recipe level. And there is no event for declaring that in the future we will create compositions that look sort of like this, and they will have confidence labels that are called this. It's in some sense it lives on a different level. Eiffel doesn't really handle that top level that much today.
No, it's the same level I would say as issue defined lives and flow context defined lives.
I think issue defined is another thing, but let's say flow context defined. I would say
okay,
would be another same thing.
Yeah, flow context might actually be something that lives. Yes.
So then it's maybe questionable, should it be an event or not?
Yeah.
Would we like going in a bit towards the suggestion yesterday to represent only a commit? It feels like it's just representing just an object or like entity. I don't know.
Why not reference the external object instead from the events that use it instead of having an event for it? We haven't really seen that problem yet because we are not yet a very heavy user of this open source Eiffel protocol. We are using the flow context defined event, which I think Axis are not, fortunately. We are using it, but I think we will eventually suffer from using it because it will be such a fan out from that event. We use it in a way to represent more or less branches in our projects, or you can say Git branches more or less. So we have more or less a from context event for the master branch of a product in some sense. That will be there forever, more or less. We will never stop using the master branch there. So that's JSON blob in some event repository will be used by every one in the future, more or less. Which might be a problem, and shouldn't we then instead have reference to some external source where that was defined? We don't have such a source. Maybe that's the problem, but yeah.
Axes are using the flow context events.
You are now, okay.
Yes.
Maybe not in the
Also
same
for branches.
For
another comment on this suggestion here. In general, I think that it makes it more complex to work with linked events rather than one event. So unless there is a specific value added by having two events, I think one event is just much more convenient to work with than two events.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd like to add a comment into this sort of label. If you sort of define label later to sort of apply it somewhere, then you just consistent to check that only these labels are being applied as confidence, for example, unless you want to refer a link to it. But then you will get a really complicated sort of event structure where the data sort of floating around as, links to other events, right? Instead of being sort of direct data feed. So we are sort of indirecting a lot of data for value. I'm not really sure if I see that yet. Maybe there's a really good value to it, but at the moment it seems to me that there may be sort of one step of indirection that it doesn't necessarily add to value. It sounds nice, but I'm not sure where it leads to in the end. Consistency-wise, we should also do the same for different types of events and sort of cleaning up that historically skewity of how we mention things. That's a huge challenge to do that. We see that now, but we should probably do that. Yeah. Particularly if we want to sort of, go into a commonization between Eiffel and seed events and see how we can sort of, commonly go forward. We have to sort of find a common ground of referring to things.
Yeah, we don't want to introduce these inconsistencies into seed events as well. So, no. I mean, yeah. So we could see it as an opportunity to make a better approach. If we don't manage to do it in Eiffel, let's keep it as it is in Eiffel, but make sure it will be better in seed events then.
I mean, the challenge is to make changes, I think. Evolving Eiffel and talking about and making new things, it's not really hard, but applying it then to use changed events and to modify events and to make that into an existing. I mean, if you go from start and take something that is brand new, then that's reasonably not a problem. But if you have been using certain events for years and then suddenly they are redefined, that becomes a major hassle for you historically, because the traceability and the usability of those events that change is not easy to just override.
Yeah, I think that there's one reason for why the flow context was, I should say, then broken out from the event definitions and put in its own event, because in our internal version of Eiffel, it is still an internal a property of all the events, just like the meta information is there. All events more or less have the flow context information in them. One problem we had, or potential problem at least we saw, and being one of the reasons to break it out to its own event, was that we saw that string that we used at that time, representing the flow context, was a free text string. People didn't always spell that right, so we didn't have good control of how that string was created. So some sub-organizations in Ericsson used it in one way, some other used it another way, and so on. Now, when we break that definition out to a single event that is referenced from all these, it's easier to make it right, and you will not misspell it. Since then, we have now got in the schema URI property in the meta object, which means you can actually impose your own regexes, for example, or filters on top of the on the strings that are in the protocol, even though we might not want to restrict certain strings in the protocol specification open source, but we could have further restrictions by internal event schemas on the event types ourselves. if we want to restrict to certain fields. So that's now a possibility which wasn't there before. So that reason has been less important.
So I guess that was kind of like your idea with breaking out definition event, conference, the definition and have a specification of it and then referring so you can't misspell it.
Yeah, for example, yeah. So if we have complex names of the conference levels, it could be so that different users of these events spell them differently or misspell them, or I don't know. So that would be one reason to have it as a separate event, but I'm not sure if that reason is valid really anymore. If we just, let's see, have some more thoughts, just
on this confidence table.
Yep.
One thing is we need to identify which of the Eiffel events actually trigger a confidence label negative. Today I can just relate test case and test suite. These are the two things. And then if we go into more deployment, like CD event service context, because in that DevOps world, okay, you have deployed, and let's say you are doing a canary where you are shifting traffic. So you say service deployed and service published in test, which means it's approved and okay to promote QA or staging. And then in staging, if 100% traffic, it's okay to promote. So those are like confidence labels. I see in the CI system.
Yeah.
And then based on that, we need to see how we can link them to these events. So we really need to see for the confidence level, it's a special kind of, it's a stamp we want to see which of these events can actually cause this event.
The cause could be any, according to the protocol specification anyway, the cause could be linking to any target. I mean, any target could currently cause something else to happen, or any event could cause something else to happen. But then we have these specific link types.
But when you're saying cause, when the idea of Eiffel protocol using cause is, I was caused by this, is basically I was triggered by it. So it's more of an event triggered system. You would link it with cause. So that's why we recently introduced the precursor.
Okay.
If you have, for example, Argo workflows, then you're running a pipeline with different steps in, and you want to say this happened before that one, we have a precursor to order the different substeps.
Okay.
So that's the idea with the cause that triggers is signal that one. I think it's used the other ways also, but that is kind of like the base idea of it.
Yeah. And we want them to introduce this conference label or conference level basis to see what was the basis of the decision, not what was the trigger of it, but what was the basis when we decided something. So they could be totally different things. I started to talk about activities in the beginning there, and discussing that we are mixing the subject properties and the predicate properties in the same event type, and discussing if that's a good thing or not. And we have been into those definition events a bit already. Just some thoughts about that. Again, not a suggestion, just to give you some thoughts on it. Here I actually excluded the cancel event. So, but here we have, I should have the right cursor again. So here I actually split, just to try what it would be. I split the defined event out of the triggered event for the activity. So I split this in two different events to keep the events more clean, I would say, to the subject or the predicate. So this way, to the left here, it's only the first event that contains subject properties and only all other events that contains predicate properties. But then again, going back to what you said, we will have, or you want as well, maybe on the phone, we'll have more events with more links, which will just make things probably more complicated. And again, then why don't we break this definition out to some other system and we point to it instead from the predicate event, so to say. Now we might not have an activity definition store that we can point to immutably in some good way. So that of course is a reason, but is that a good reason or not? Another option would be to do as is done to the right here, to duplicate all subject related information into all events. So we don't need to discuss where is the definition of this activity. Well, the subject properties are then actually in each of the events. This is currently how it's done in CD events, which I might not be too fond of, but one reason is there because we don't have the links and we need to see what activity was actually started. We cannot find the triggered event easily from the started event, so instead we duplicate the information in here. So this is more how current CD events looks like, I would say, in some sense. I'm sure if you agree, Matthias, I think so. That's one other way to go. If we would do it even more, let's see, what's this? Yeah, just what would the effects then be? How we link into these activity events. So if we would separate the definition from the actual triggering, or rather here, I split it even once more to say that we have defined an activity and then we actually created it, we instantiate it before we even trigger it. I'm not sure if that makes sense at all, but I think I came there to see what should actually the context of an some operation happening within an activity, what should it naturally have as a context? It's not really the trigger semantically, that is the context. It's rather the execution instance that is the context of the, in this case, the conference level modified event. So it's really the instance of this activity, which is then the created subject or the instantiated subject, which would then have some kind of definition before it was instantiated, before it was stamped. It has, and the stamp was in the air before it was actually created. So here we have split now into 5 different events, still not having the cancelled event. Actually realized that I reused Act C there.
This matches pretty well how we are discussing. Me and Piet have been discussing this a lot, and we see like when you have an activity, typically, and by activity then I mean something that you can run, not something that you're running. Then you want to be able to say, like, for instance, what is the configuration of this activity? What artifacts contain the implementation of this activity? So you consider that basically as a composition in some sense. Say, like, if I want to rerun the same activity, what composition or baseline or artifacts do I need to fetch to actually get the same implementation? That would fit very well into an activity defined here, because it's a version of the activity or implementation of the activity. And then what you call activity created here, we would call an activity run. Same way that we have a pipeline and a pipeline run. You have an activity and you have an activity run.
Yeah.
And the activity run is what you can actually trigger and start and finish.
Yeah, exactly.
And then with something like this, it would be trivial to see, like, okay, I have an activity, if we call it an activity run created. Okay, but when was the last time this activity was changed? Because I see strange things in the results. Oh, we actually changed the definition yesterday. Okay, then maybe I should go look at the definition. Maybe that was.
So you draw a line between the sort of declarative part, which is a definition, the imperative part, which is in creation, and the other one.
Yeah, basically the way we think about it.
There's a separation between your declaration and your
exactly. So it's one layer of recipes for things you can do. Then there's another layer for things you're actually doing. Yeah, that's the way we look at it.
So looking at the time here, we are, as we said, behind schedule, but yeah.
Yes, any comment or confusion? Act C isn't that cancelled?
Yeah. As I said, I reused the abbreviation here.
Okay.
So it, I mean, if I would say change it directly, then it should be instead activity run there, maybe, as Eric said. So I direct this activity run. Something, or yeah, do not confuse it with activity cancelled.
I think like I understand it's nice or better in semantic way of thinking about it, but I feel a bit like the more events you add, the bigger or the harder it becomes to start out and to start, because you're also, when you're doing that, you're kind of imposing a way that it should be modeled rather than having lesser events, and maybe they're a bit more generic, but then also you can kind of easily adapt it to your own situation in practice.
Yeah, it's a give and take, and
it's like a balance.
Yeah, it is. It is. I just wanted to. I mean, the reason maybe for lifting this, not proposal again, but lifting this, view. If we would go all the way to have node application in the events and define the things where they are actually defined in the events, more or less this would have been what we should have ended up with, but it would have been probably quite useless as a producer of the event, or very hard to implement, even harder than today. So I don't think that we want to go this way, but how can we then more or less fulfill the needs of having a conformant protocol without doing this, but instead doing something maybe slightly better than what we have today? I just wanted to raise this discussion, and then any of you might have good proposals, and you're free to publish them as issues or to discussions in our community meetings or whatever, to help make the protocol even better than we have today, more conformant.
But you actually had another slide you just passed by, which was the question of the trigger created and defined.
Yeah,
that one. That is probably a question that is pretty interesting to know, and and maybe think about it if we have some resources, because right now, if you're coming new, I don't know if you're really know, okay, it's defined or created. It's something you have to learn in your head.
obviously, if you have an SDK and if you have, I mean, the spec next to you, you don't need to know. You can just look it up easily. As long as there are not 1,000 different event types, it's quite okay. But it's not conformant.
I was more thinking about performance if we should solve some conformance in that this might be one of the things we could go into. For example, it's you have an artifact you create, but you define an issue. Whereas an artifact you have an artifact repository, and an issue you have some ER system, but we use two different terms for it.
Yeah, and a source change is created, but we don't ever create a conference level. For example, we just modify something that supposedly exists somewhere, but we say we modified it. It's a bit strange. So I don't think that the CD event will be called conference level modified anyway. Hopefully something better. Yeah.
But is this something that people are thinking of, or is it only like me and Emil who's talking about this because we're discussing CD events also? And
You change your that.
Huh?
You just change your that.
Okay.
So the thing is, when you mention it and when you point stuff out, it's I mean, being an engineer, some stuff is like horrible. What?
Yeah.
Why have you do what's I'm doing?
So why did I mention it?
But
Sorry, I'm sorry.
I'm a bit concerned also that the more complexity and stuff you bring into it, I think we might lose the agnostic parts also. There's a danger there that we use similar tools and similar ways of working, and we start modeling that into the protocol, not model in the protocol. It might become restricted, and the grand plan of the great founders, Daniel and other people, might be convoluted or converted to something else, which is kind of a shame, I think. But I'm not sure it might not be a bad thing, but I'm just thinking that I don't know. There's something about doing this that makes it feel that we're making it restricted. Since I'm not thinking about this like you guys are, I can't really think out what it is right now, but it might be worth investing some thought and some more discussions into it. I don't think so, but not to go like full on into everything that has to be. But like the issued events now are my enemy. One, those are very strange and weird. Looking at it when you look at all of them.
Yeah.
Also, this confidence level thing. Actually, it's similar to if you say a test suit or number of test suits finished with a pass certificate. That is actually a confidence level. So
now it depends on. I mean, I think those are different dimensions. I mean, test suites are how you
is a confidence level.
Sorry.
Artifact build is a confidence level in itself that you can build the code.
Actually,
deploy the code. That's a confidence, and your tests have been run. That's a confidence, and you can deploy it in production. That's a confidence.
Actually, in the internal Eiffel protocol, when you send an artifact created event, the corresponding one, you can actually set the confidence level in that event, saying this is success. This was a successful artifact. But we didn't keep that in the open source protocol because we thought it was not good to keep it in the same.
It was brought into the issue of successful. Stuff.
Yeah. Isn't it strange? Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I'm not sure, but I believe that the reason for it is, as I said, they were transferred from properties to links because we created each defined event.
This is probably the only place you need to actually trace 3 links to get to the defined event. So if you have a verified event, you actually need to get this link.
Yeah, maybe we should stop there, but keep thinking and keep providing improvements. So I don't have any prepared improvements based on this, but now we have seen some peculiarities of the protocol.
I could just have one reflection that when we're discussing this, I mean, thinking about changing protocols as a whole. When we talk about seed events, this might be a theoretical one, but it might be a reason we're going to seed events if we can manage to get that protocol clean without the hiccups. You would have it here because I don't know, as you're saying, is it worth to redesign the whole Eiffel system with its hiccups, or should we just document them and say this is how it is?
However, have you discussed anything what we talk about now in terms of CD?
No.
With the naming and
not more than that we intentionally use this subject predicate in a more clear form. And actually there is a proposal, well, that was from seed events presentation earlier. The structure there is that there is a context and a subject, I think it is, the terms now. But in the subject object of the seed event, there are actually predicate properties. So there is an proposal there to split that into subject-specific object and a predicate-specific object. So it will be clearer in the event specification what properties belong to the subject and what properties are actually predicate properties. That will make it even clearer. So that's one way to, at least when we have such a structure, it's easier to not do wrong when we create a new event type, which I think is a good thing.